Let me be absolutely clear about something. Niceness is not a virtue when it's cowardice dressed in civility. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, someone who manipulates, exploits, and plays games with your identity, being nice is not only ineffective, it's dangerous. We are culturally conditioned to equate being nice with being good. But niceness is not morality, it's not strength, and it sure as hell isn't wisdom. Especially when the person on the receiving end sees your kindness as a weakness to exploit. Narcissists thrive on your compliance. They feed off your need for harmony. And they use your decency as the perfect leash to drag you through their drama, their blame, and their endless thirst for control. So what do you do instead? You stop playing their game. You stop feeding the monster. You set boundaries like your soul depends on it, because it does. You speak truth, not to hurt, but to hold the line. You dare to be disliked, because chasing approval from someone who will never give it sincerely is a spiritual death. And maybe, just maybe, you grow the spine to walk away when everything in you wants to stay and fix it. This isn't about becoming cruel, it's about becoming clear. Clear about who you are, clear about what you value, and clear about who doesn't deserve access to your inner world. Because the moment you stop trying to manage their feelings and start protecting your peace, that's the moment you reclaim your life. Niceness is often mistaken for virtue, especially in modern culture where being agreeable and inoffensive is held up as a social ideal. But what we fail to recognize is that niceness, when rooted in fear, is not a moral strength. It's a psychological trap. It masquerades as kindness, but operates as it's not rooted in love or courage, but in the desperate need to avoid conflict, rejection, or disapproval. And that makes it a dangerous habit when dealing with people who have narcissistic tendencies. When you are nice out of fear, what you're really doing is abandoning your authenticity. You silence your truth. You make yourself smaller, more palatable, less threatening, just to keep the peace. You ignore your instincts, your discomfort, your anger, all because you're terrified of what might happen if you assert yourself. But the cost of that suppression is enormous. You start to doubt your own judgment. You feel resentful, but pretend you're fine. You convince yourself you're being mature, diplomatic, even virtuous, when in reality you're enabling toxic behavior and slowly eroding your own integrity. A narcissist can smell this kind of niceness from a mile away. It's a signal. It tells them you won't push back, you won't risk confrontation, and you won't walk away, even when they cross the line. To them, your niceness isn't compassion, it's compliance. It's a license to manipulate, to criticize, to gaslight, to blame. And the more you give in under the banner of being nice, the more they tighten the grip. Because for them, every ounce of your self-silencing is fuel for their sense of control. There's a part of you that probably believes being nice will eventually win them over. That if you just stay patient enough, generous enough, tolerant enough, they'll change. That your goodness will inspire their goodness. But that fantasy is rooted in your own need to feel safe, not in the reality of who they are. Narcissists don't respond to niceness with gratitude. They respond with entitlement. They see your silence as permission and your forgiveness as weakness. They don't introspect because you're making everything so easy for them. There are no consequences, no accountability, just a revolving door of second chances and swallowed boundaries. What you have to understand is that true virtue, true strength, doesn't come from being nice. It comes from being honest, from being willing to say what you think even if your voice shakes, from being willing to walk away even if your heart breaks. Niceness without strength is just self-betrayal in polite clothing. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, that kind of niceness is the perfect tool for your own destruction. You can't heal a narcissist by playing small. You can't make them respect you by showing how endlessly tolerant you are. All you do is teach them how much you're willing to endure. And the longer you stay in that role, the nice one, the understanding one, the endlessly forgiving one, the more you lose touch with who you really are. Narcissists have an uncanny ability to sniff out empathy in others, not because they admire it, but because they know exactly how to use it to their advantage. Empathy, when held by someone with self-awareness and healthy boundaries, is a powerful connector. But in the hands of a narcissist, your empathy becomes ammunition. They exploit it, twist it, and weaponize it. What you consider a strength, your ability to understand, to care, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, they see as an open door to manipulate and control you. At first, it may seem like they're vulnerable. They'll tell you just enough about their pain, their trauma, or how others have wronged them. This is bait. They know that if they show a crack in the armor, your instincts will kick in. You'll want to help, to fix, to heal. You'll make excuses for them when they behave poorly. You'll rationalize their selfishness, telling yourself they're just wounded or they didn't mean it. But while you're busy giving them the benefit of the doubt, they're watching you carefully, learning exactly how far they can push you. Your empathy becomes their shield. They hide behind it, using your kindness as justification for their behavior. They might lash out, then turn the blame around on you. And because you're empathetic, you pause and consider, did I provoke them? Did I not say it kindly enough? Suddenly you're the one apologizing. You're the one doing the emotional labor, walking on eggshells, trying to manage their reactions while suppressing your own. And that's exactly how they want it. They train you over time to center their emotional needs above your own. Your boundaries become blurred. You start to question your right to be upset. When you bring up a concern, they may respond with exaggerated guilt or worse, rage. Either response triggers your empathy. You feel bad for confronting them or scared of upsetting them further, so you drop it. You let it go, and they learn, again, that your compassion is a tool they can count on to avoid accountability. One of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic manipulation is that it makes you turn against yourself. You begin to believe that your inability to fix the relationship is a reflection of your failure, not theirs. That if only you were more understanding, more patient, more forgiving, things would get better. But no amount of empathy can change a person who is committed to avoiding self-reflection. Narcissists don't grow from empathy. They use it to justify their stagnation. They don't want connection. They want control. They don't want understanding, they want submission. The more empathetic you are, the more they mold themselves into a figure deserving of endless leniency, all while giving you as little emotional reciprocity as possible. Your feelings become background noise in a relationship that revolves around their needs, their moods, their image. Empathy without boundaries is not love, it's self-sacrifice disguised as care. Narcissists will always take more than you can afford to give because they see your empathy not as a bridge to mutual understanding, but as a resource to mine until you're depleted. Telling the truth in the presence of manipulation is an act of moral courage. When you're dealing with a narcissist, speaking the truth becomes even more essential, not for the sake of changing them, but to preserve your own sanity and integrity. Narcissists are masters of distortion. They bend reality, twist narratives, and play fast and loose with facts in order to maintain control and protect their fragile egos. In that environment, truth becomes a threat because it exposes what they're trying so desperately to hide. Appeasement may feel safer in the short term. It might seem easier to avoid conflict, to stay silent, to nod along even when you disagree. But every time you choose to appease instead of speak honestly, You hand over a piece of your self-respect. You start to live in their version of reality, and over time, it becomes harder to distinguish your own voice from the noise of their manipulation. Appeasement doesn't build peace, it builds resentment. And it teaches the narcissist that lies and control will always win over honesty and authenticity. Truth, by contrast, is anchoring. It brings clarity to confusion and stability to emotional chaos. Speaking truth to a narcissist is not about provoking them or trying to break them down. It's about refusing to abandon your perception of reality. It's about saying, I see what's happening, even if you won't admit it. That alone is a form of resistance. It's a way of protecting yourself from being gaslit, from being pulled into a vortex of their shifting stories and self-serving logic. The truth doesn't have to be aggressive to be powerful. You don't need to shout, accuse, or humiliate. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is something simple and firm. That's not how I see it, or that's not acceptable to me. These statements don't require their approval. They don't depend on their agreement. They are a declaration of your sovereignty, your right to name what you see and feel, regardless of how they react. What makes truth uncomfortable is that it disrupts the dynamic narcissists depend on. They count on your silence, your compliance, your desire to keep things smooth. But the moment you begin to speak honestly, even with trembling hands, you interrupt the game. You signal that you're not afraid to live in reality, even if it's messy, even if it means confrontation, even if it means loss. You can't control how a narcissist receives your truth, but you can control whether or not you speak it. And that's where your power lies. Because truth forces clarity. It draws lines. It makes manipulation harder to sustain. When you start telling the truth, not to hurt them, but to protect yourself, you become more grounded, more conscious, and more alive. It may not lead to peace with the narcissist, but it will lead to peace with yourself. And that peace is worth far more than their temporary approval. Boundaries are not about punishing others, they're about protecting yourself. When you're dealing with a narcissist, boundaries aren't just useful, they're essential. Without them, your identity, your time, and your emotional well-being will be slowly consumed by the narcissist's endless needs and manipulations. And here's what most people misunderstand. Setting boundaries is not an act of hostility. It's not aggression. It's self-respect in motion. Narcissists push limits constantly. They test how far they can go, how much you'll tolerate, how easily you'll cave. If you give an inch, they'll take a mile, not because they need it, but because it reinforces their power. They thrive on control, and boundaries are a direct challenge to that control. When you begin to assert limits, you're telling them, you don't get to define me. You don't get to dictate the terms of my emotional life. And they hate that because it removes the tools they use to dominate the relationship. At first, setting boundaries will feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, or maintaining harmony at all costs. You might even feel guilty. That guilt isn't a signal that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new. You're interrupting an old pattern of self-abandonment. You're choosing discomfort over dysfunction. And that's where real strength is built. Boundaries with narcissists must be clear, consistent, and non-negotiable. You can't hint. You can't hope they'll read between the lines. You have to spell it out. And when they push back, and they will, you have to stand your ground. That resistance you feel, it's not an indication that you're being too harsh. It's proof that they were benefiting from your lack of boundaries all along. They were comfortable with your silence, with your flexibility, with your endless forgiveness, and now, suddenly, you're no longer easy to control. That's going to provoke a reaction. They might respond with anger, manipulation, or self-pity. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, or ungrateful, but none of that means you're wrong. Narcissists conflate control with love, so when you stop letting them control you, they'll say you're the one being unfair. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. And protecting your emotional space doesn't make you cruel, it makes you conscious. One of the most empowering realizations is that you don't owe access to anyone who continually harms you, confuses you, or drains you. You're allowed to say, this doesn't work for me, and walk away without explaining yourself 100 times. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks. You decide who gets in, how long they stay, and under what conditions. That's not selfishness. That's psychological maturity. When you begin to live this way, with clarity instead of compliance, you'll start to notice something profound. You're no longer exhausted from managing someone else's chaos. You're no longer lost in their moods, their games, their stories. You begin to reclaim your time, your mind, your energy, and all of that begins with one powerful decision: to draw a line and mean it. The need to be liked is one of the most subtle and powerful traps that keeps people tethered to toxic relationships, especially with narcissists. It often starts innocently, a desire to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to maintain harmony. But over time, that desire becomes a dependency. You start measuring your worth by how others perceive you, especially those who are the hardest to please. And narcissists, by their very nature, are nearly impossible to satisfy. Their approval is like a moving target, always shifting, always just out of reach. But because their validation is so rare and so conditional, it becomes even more addictive. You start bending yourself into shapes that don't even resemble who you are. You monitor your tone, your words, your reactions, all in hopes of staying in their good graces. You avoid saying anything that might upset them, and when you do, you immediately backtrack or over-explain, hoping to earn back their favor. You think that if you just stay calm, agreeable, understanding, if you're nice enough, patient enough, generous enough, eventually they'll recognize your loyalty and return it with the kind of consistent love or approval you're looking for. But that moment never comes. Narcissists are not interested in mutual respect. They are interested in dominance, admiration, and control. The more willing you are to contort yourself for their approval, the more you reinforce their belief that they are the one who sets the rules, who defines the terms of your relationship, who determines your value. Your self-erasure becomes their power source. Wanting to be liked isn't inherently wrong. It's human. But when it becomes a requirement for your self-worth, you end up betraying yourself again and again. You silence your opinions, you suppress your needs, you tolerate what you shouldn't. And what's worse, you start to think that this is what being good means. But goodness without boundaries is martyrdom, and martyrdom in the presence of a narcissist is a one-way ticket to resentment and burnout. A turning point that comes when you realize that being liked is not worth the cost of abandoning who you are. You realize that some people will never like you, no matter how kind or accommodating you are, and that their disapproval is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but of their inability to engage with others in a healthy, reciprocal way. You begin to understand that real respect can't be earned by shrinking, earned by standing firm in your truth, even if it means standing alone. The fear of being disliked is deeply wired, but it can be unlearned. It starts with tolerating the discomfort that comes from holding a boundary or saying no without a lengthy justification. It means surviving their coldness, their criticism, their withdrawal, and not letting it shake your foundation. Because when you stop fearing their disapproval, you become unmanageable in the best possible way. You stop playing by their rules. You reclaim your autonomy. You choose authenticity over approval. And in doing so, you begin to return to yourself. Reclaiming your peace isn't a passive process. It's a deliberate act of courage. Especially when you're entangled with a narcissist, finding your way back to yourself requires more than distance or silence. It requires strength, clarity, and the willingness to face discomfort head on. Narcissists thrive on chaos, on confusion, on your emotional reactivity. If they can keep you unstable, always trying to figure them out or win them over, they remain in control. Your peace, therefore, becomes the greatest threat to their dominance. It signals that you are no longer available to be manipulated. Peace is not the absence of conflict with others, it's the absence of internal war. What happens when your thoughts, your values, and your actions align? But narcissistic relationships pull you out of that alignment constantly. You end up second-guessing yourself, overthinking everything, trying to predict someone else's behavior, and feeling like you're always walking into an emotional minefield. That's not peace. It's hypervigilance. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more normal it feels, until you forget that calm is even possible. Getting back to peace means being willing to let go of the fantasy that you can fix the narcissist or change the relationship. That's where most people get stuck. There's a persistent hope that if you just say the right thing or show enough love or wait long enough, the narcissist will finally have a breakthrough. But that moment never comes. They may offer flashes of vulnerability or temporary improvement, but it never lasts because they're not interested in growth, they're interested in control. Walking away, whether physically or emotionally, is not weakness. It is the refusal to keep playing a game where the rules are rigged. It's not about giving up, it's about choosing yourself. And that takes far more courage than staying and suffering in silence. The narcissist will frame your departure as abandonment, betrayal, or selfishness. They will guilt you, criticize you, or try to lure you back with false promises. But none of that changes the fundamental truth. Peace cannot exist in a place where your boundaries are ignored and your reality is denied. Reclaiming your peace also means you stop making excuses for their behavior. You stop internalizing their blame. You stop filtering your emotions through their reactions. You start paying attention to your body, your instincts, your fatigue. You stop betraying yourself to maintain a connection that only drains you. And slowly you begin to feel the difference. You notice your shoulders are less tense. Your mind isn't racing all the time. You can breathe deeper. You can hear your own voice again. It's not easy. The process is often messy, emotional, and full of doubt. But that's the nature of transformation. You are dismantling patterns that have defined your identity and stepping into a version of yourself that no longer needs chaos to feel alive. It requires you to be brave, to be honest, and most importantly, to be protective of your own peace, even when no one else understands why you're doing it. And so, the message is clear. You are not obligated to destroy yourself for the comfort of someone who thrives on your confusion, your compliance, and your silence. Stop being nice to a narcissist. It is not kindness, it is surrender. Instead, speak your truth, even if your voice trembles. Set boundaries, not because you are cruel, but because you are finally choosing to protect what is sacred within you. Refuse to let your empathy be weaponized, your peace be shattered, or your worth be defined by someone who cannot see past their own reflection. You were not put on this earth to be an emotional sponge for someone else's dysfunction. You were not born to carry someone else's brokenness on your back while you apologize for bleeding. Let go of the need to be liked by people who are incapable of loving you without conditions. Stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Reclaim your power. Reclaim your space. Reclaim your peace. Because the moment you stop trying to win the narcissist's approval, you begin to remember who you are. And that is the beginning of freedom, not the kind that begs for permission, but the kind that stands tall, speaks clearly, and walks away when dignity demands it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time, your presence, and your courage to face hard truths. May you walk forward with strength, clarity, and the conviction that you deserve better, not someday, but now. Goodbye, and take care of your peace like your life depends on it, because it does.